didn't start with missiles. There were no fighter jets screaming across the sky, no beaches stormed at dawn, no dramatic declaration of war. Instead, it happened quietly, through meetings, supply chains, alliances, and decisions most people never saw. And yet, the result may be one of the most significant strategic defeats in modern history. Without firing a single shot, the United States may have effectively shut down China's long-feared invasion of Taiwan. The real question is how, and the more important question is why it worked. For years, the idea of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan loomed like a countdown clock no one could see clearly. Analysts argued over timelines. Some said it would happen by the mid-2020s. Others warned it could come sooner, triggered by political shifts or military confidence. Military exercises around Taiwan grew larger and more frequent. War games simulated blockades, amphibious landings, cyber attacks. The tension was real, and it was building. Then, something changed. What AS striking is that the change didn't tease come from a dramatic show of force aimed directly at China. Instead, it came from a web of actions that reshaped the environment around the problem. The kind of actions that don't make headlines at first, but quietly alter the cost of aggression. China didn't suddenly announce it was backing down. There was no public retreat. But when you look closely, the invasion scenario that once looked plausible now looks far less achievable. To understand why, you have to understand Taiwan's unique position. Taiwan is not just an island with political symbolism. It sits at the heart of global technology. A large share of the world's most advanced semiconductors are manufactured there. These chips power everything from smartphones to cars to military systems. Disrupting Taiwan doesn't just create a regional crisis. It sends shockwaves through the global economy. That fact alone changes how every major power calculates risk. The United States understood this leverage early. Rather than framing Taiwan purely as a military issue, Washington treated it as an economic and technological linchpin. Supply chains became strategy. Factories became deterrence. Over the past few years, the U.S. and its partners began quietly diversifying semiconductor production, investing heavily in domestic manufacturing and alternative locations. On the surface, it looked like economic policy. In reality, it reduced the incentive for China to gamble on a takeover that could destroy the very assets it wants to control. At the same time, the U.S. moved to strengthen Taiwan-U.S. ability to defend itself in ways that matter most in a real conflict. Not flashy weapons designed for parades, but systems built for denial, mobile missile launchers, advanced air defenses, naval mines, cyber resilience. The kind of capabilities that don't promise victory but guarantee pain. History shows that invasions fail more often because of logistics and resistance than because of headline-grabbing firepower. Taiwan's defenses were reshaped around that lesson. There's an interesting parallel here with Iran, often discussed in a completely different context. For decades, Iran has deterred direct invasion, not by matching its rival's weapon for weapon, but by raising the cost of attack through layered defenses, regional influence, and the promise of prolonged instability. The U.S. studied that model closely. In Taiwan's case, the goal wasn't to make invasion impossible, but to make it irrational. Another key shift happened in alliances. For years, China could assume that any conflict over Taiwan would primarily involve the U.S., and perhaps a few regional partners. That assumption no longer holds. Japan made its position clearer than ever, signaling that Taiwan's security is directly tied to its own. Australia deepened military cooperation. European powers, once hesitant, began to speak openly about the importance of stability in the Taiwan Strait. When potential aggressors face not one opponent but a network, the calculus changes dramatically. One insight that often gets overlooked is how much modern warfare depends on information dominance. Satellites, undersea cables, data centers, and real-time intelligence now shape outcomes before the first shot is fired. The U.S. and its allies invested heavily in making sure any move toward Taiwan would be visible, tracked, and shared instantly. Surprise, one of the most valuable assets in war, was quietly taken off the table. Economic pressure played its part as well. Sanctions imposed in other global conflicts served as live demonstrations of what coordinated financial action can do. China watched closely as access to technology, markets, and currency systems became weapons. An invasion of Taiwan would almost certainly trigger an economic response on a scale far larger than anything seen before. The question Chinese planners had to ask themselves was simple but brutal. Could the domestic economy absorb that shock? Domestic stability matters more than many outsiders realize. China's leadership places enormous importance on economic growth and social control. A prolonged conflict, especially one that disrupts trade and employment, carries risks that extend far beyond the battlefield. When war threatens the internal balance of power, even strong militaries hesitate. Another fascinating element is how ambiguity was used as a tool. The U.S. did not make a single dramatic announcement saying it would defend Taiwan at all costs. Instead, it layered signals. Statements here, exercises there. Arms deliveries framed as routine. This strategic ambiguity kept China guessing. Certainty can sometimes provoke action. Uncertainty can delay it indefinitely. Technology also tilted the balance. Advances in surveillance, anti-ship missiles, and drone warfare have made large amphibious operations far more dangerous than they were in the past. Crossing a narrow strait under constant observation, facing precision strikes from land, sea, and air, is a nightmare scenario for any military planner. Even a numerically superior force can be bled dry before reaching shore. Those realities are no longer theoretical. They're tested and visible. The story doesn't end with military factors. Diplomacy worked in the background, often quietly. Channels remained open. Red lines were communicated without megaphones. In global politics, avoiding war often depends on allowing rivals a face-saving way to step back. The U.S. approach seemed designed to constrain options without cornering China publicly. Iran's situation again offers a useful comparison. When pressure becomes too overt, it can trigger defiance. When it's layered and indirect, it can reshape behavior without open confrontation. That principle appears to have guided much of the strategy around Taiwan. Perhaps the most telling sign came not from Washington, but from Beijing's own behavior. Rhetoric remained strong, but actions became more cautious. Exercises stopped short of irreversible steps. Timelines blurred. Confidence, once projected loudly, grew quieter. In geopolitics, silence can be revealing. What we're witnessing is a form of conflict that doesn't fit traditional definitions. It's competition without combat, victory without invasion. Deterrence achieved not through fear alone, but through complexity. The U.S. didn't end the threat by overpowering China. It did so by making the path to invasion so tangled, costly, and uncertain that the risk outweighed the reward. And this raises a deeper question for the future. If wars can be prevented this way, through economic integration, technological leverage, and alliance networks, what does power really mean in the modern world? Is it about tanks and ships, or about systems and connections? The Taiwan situation suggests that the most effective strategies today operate in the space before war begins, the space where decisions are shaped, not forced, where options narrow quietly, not explosively. It's not as dramatic as missiles on the horizon, but it may be far more consequential. As the world continues to watch the Taiwan Strait, one thing is clear. The absence of conflict doesn't mean nothing happened. It often means something worked. And understanding how it worked may be one of the most important lessons of our time. What makes this moment even more fascinating is that deterrence didn't come from a single dramatic decision. It came from layers of pressure applied over time, like slowly tightening a vice. China didn't wake up one day and decide Taiwan was off the table. Instead, every new variable introduced another risk, another unknown, another potential failure point. And when you stack enough of those together, even the most confident military planners start to hesitate. One of the biggest shifts happened in the realm of intelligence and transparency. 20 years ago, a major power could quietly prepare for war behind closed doors. Troop movements could be hidden. Naval deployments could be disguised as exercises. Today, that's almost impossible. Commercial satellites now pass over the Taiwan Strait multiple times a day. Independent analysts on social media track ship movements using open-source data. Even civilians can monitor Air Force activity with flight trackers. This has created a strange new reality where secrecy, once a cornerstone of warfare, has become a liability. Any Chinese buildup would be spotted early, discussed publicly, and responded to before the first landing craft even left port. This constant visibility gives the defender an enormous psychological edge. Taiwan wouldn't be caught off guard. The U.S. wouldn't be caught off guard. Markets wouldn't be caught off guard. And that last point matters more than most people realize. Financial markets react instantly to fear. Insurance rates skyrocket. Shipping reroutes. Capital flees. Long before the first shot, China would be absorbing economic damage simply from the expectation of war. That kind of pre-war punishment changes decision-making in ways that tanks and missiles never could. There's also the question of control. Even if China launched an invasion, could it control how far the conflict escalates? That's one of the most dangerous uncertainties. The U.S. has deliberately kept its response ambiguous. It hasn't promised to fight, but it hasn't promised not to either. That ambiguity forces Beijing to assume the worst. Would U.S. submarines intervene? Would Japan allow its bases to be used? Would cyber attacks spill into civilian infrastructure? Would space assets be targeted? None of these questions have clean answers, and that's the point. Uncertainty is deterrence. Another important factor is Taiwan itself. For years, critics argued that Taiwan was complacent, overconfident, or too reliant on the U.S. That perception changed dramatically after Ukraine. Taiwan accelerated reforms, extended military training, and shifted away from legacy systems toward asymmetric defense, small mobile units, civil defense planning, infrastructure hardening, even public awareness campaigns. This isn't the image of an easy takeover. It's the image of a society preparing to resist. History shows that occupying a hostile population is often harder than defeating its army. China knows this well from its own past, And then there's the naval equation. On paper, China's navy looks formidable. In practice, projecting power across open water while sustaining supply lines is a brutal test. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, medical evacuation. Every mile of ocean multiplies vulnerability. Submarines don't need to sink every ship. They only need to sink enough to disrupt tempo. Mines don't need to cover the entire strait. They only need to create uncertainty. A single damaged transport at the wrong moment could delay follow-on waves, turning a rapid assault into a stalled operation. Momentum is everything in amphibious warfare. Lose it, and the entire plan starts to unravel. This is where comparisons with other conflicts become useful. Russia assumed Ukraine would collapse quickly. That assumption shaped everything that followed. When it didn't happen, Russia found itself trapped in a grinding war it never planned for. China has studied that failure obsessively. The lesson wasn't just about military mistakes. It was about misjudging will, identity, and international response. Taiwan isn't just a territory to be seized. It's a political symbol with global resonance. Any attempt to take it by force would instantly redefine China's image worldwide. Now zoom out further, and you see how Taiwan fits into a much larger chessboard. The US isn't just deterring China in isolation. It's managing multiple pressure points at once. Europe, the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific. Iran plays a subtle but important role here. Iran's confrontations with the US and its allies stretch American resources and attention. China has historically benefited when the US is distracted, but that also cuts both ways. If a Taiwan crisis erupted alongside a Middle East escalation involving Iran, the risk of miscalculation would skyrocket for everyone. That's not a stable environment for launching a high-risk invasion. Interestingly, Iran's use of proxies has influenced how the US thinks about deterrence more broadly. Rather than confronting Iran directly, the US often focuses on disrupting networks, finances, and logistics. The same philosophy is being applied to China, not through proxies, but through systems. Shipping insurance, export controls, technology access, energy routes, these are the modern equivalents of choke points. They don't look dramatic on the evening news, but they shape strategic reality. One revealing insight came from China's own internal discussions, some of which have leaked through academic and policy channels. There's an ongoing debate inside China about timing, not whether reunification should happen, but when and how. And increasingly, the how looks less like a sudden invasion and more like long-term pressure. Economic integration, political influence, information operations, gray zone tactics. The absence of an invasion doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means the conflict has shifted into slower, quieter domains. Another underreported factor is energy. China imports a massive percentage of its oil and gas through sea lanes that could be disrupted in a major war. Unlike the US, China doesn't have the same level of energy independence. A prolonged conflict would strain fuel supplies not just for the military, but for the entire economy. Factories, transportation, heating. Energy security becomes national stability. That vulnerability looms large in any serious war planning. And then there's demographics again, because they can't be ignored. China's working-age population is shrinking. The one-child policy created a generation where many families have a single son. The political tolerance for mass casualties is lower than it once was. This isn't just speculation. Chinese social media reactions to even small military losses show how sensitive public opinion can be. A high-casualty invasion would test narratives of strength and competence in uncomfortable ways. What all of this adds up to is a strategic pause. Not peace, not resolution. A pause created by deterrence, complexity, and fear of unintended consequences. The US didn't defeat China. It didn't force a retreat. It shaped an environment where pulling the trigger looks like the worst possible option. And that's a very different kind of power than most people are used to thinking about. But pauses don't last forever. The world keeps changing. Technology evolves. Alliances shift. Leaders come and go. The same tools that deter today might fail tomorrow. That's why this story isn't over. It's entering a new phase, one defined less by countdown clocks and more by endurance. Who can maintain alliances longer? Who can adapt faster? Who can absorb pressure without cracking? As we move forward, the real question isn't whether China will invade tomorrow. It's whether deterrence can outlast ambition, whether quiet strategies can keep preventing loud disasters, and whether the lessons learned from Ukraine, Iran, and decades of global power struggles will actually be remembered when the stakes are highest. Because in geopolitics, the most dangerous moment often isn't when tensions are rising. It's when everyone starts believing the crisis has passed.